Hello, everybody. This is Arnie Singleton, a.k.a. T-Dog from The Walking Dead, and you are listening to Dispatch Radio with my main man, Brandon.
All right, I want to get to a story that kind of got by the radar screen and, really has moved very quickly in court. And, it's a 2012 case that went against the UCLA college. And Dr. James Enstrom has really won a victory here, folks. And I really want to get an expert on the phone with us, talk about some of the details of the case, his battle against some of these scientific elitists, and I'll use that term and not put words in David French's mouth, but just a very interesting story, and I want to get right to it. So, David, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I appreciate you fitting us in, and I guess, the settlement's been had, and we get to find out a little bit more about what exactly sort of had taken place and then kind of what we've learned since then. So give us a little intro to what actually the university and kind of how they handled things that Dr. Enstrom was putting forth.
Sure. What happened is in California, the California Air Resources Board was considering a series of job-killing regulations that were going to restrict the trucking industry more than anything else in California by restricting diesel emissions. And the reasoning for the restriction of diesel emissions is they were claiming that the exhaust from trucks was killing California. So Dr. Enstrom took a look at the research underlying this assertion because these regulations would cost people their jobs, and he wanted to know if the science stacked up. And he actually found out by doing his own peer-reviewed research that the number of people dying in California as a result of the diesel emissions of trucks was approximately zero, and that the regulations themselves would save approximately 0 lives. So he did a little bit more research and discovered that the person putting forward, the lead researcher for the California Air Resources Board, putting forward the junk science saying that thousands of Californians' lives could be saved, actually had a fake PhD. He purchased it from a fictional Thornhill University for about $1,000. So Dr. Enstrom publicized this. He publicized his own research findings, which disagreed with the research findings at CARB. He publicized the fake credentials of this lead researcher. And he also publicized that the scientific review panel, which is supposed to review the science to make sure that problems like this don't occur, was heavily stocked with ideologues who'd overstayed lawful term limits. In other words, in some cases, they had been on the scientific review panel for decades longer than they were allowed to under law. So he blew the whistle on undoubtedly lawless and corrupt actions. And here's what happened. He was fired. Now, if he'd been a liberal and he'd blown the whistle on corruption in the conservative circles, he'd receive awards from the university. He'd probably be the subject of a movie by now. But there, he was terminated after about 35 years of service.
It's just an incredible story. I really am. You're hitting the nail on the head too, right? Because maybe I should get with Dr. Enstrom and start working on a screenplay for a biography and see if I can get Oliver Stone to do it for us. Because first off, just the whole premise, right? That the diesel emissions are killing people. I mean, how on earth could you even conduct a science experiment to try to extrapolate such a broad scoped? I mean, it's such a massive theory that there's no way that you could even create such a bubble that you could contain this kind of scientific experiment to quantify such a thing. And then to have Enstrom do such an incredible job of outing the corruption, and the university fires him. So when that happens, how long does it take, or what does he do next, and how does he get you guys involved?
Well, first he fought the termination internally at UCLA. He filed an appeal at UCLA, and he didn't have a lawyer at that time. So he lost his appeal. UCLA finalized the termination. And that's when I had actually seen from the Foundation for Individual Life and Education, which is a nonpartisan civil liberties group, I had seen a short YouTube clip that they put together, a YouTube video about Dr. Enstrom. So I called Dr. Enstrom and I said, I saw your story and I'd be interested in helping you. And that's when we started working together. And we filed suit against UCLA in 2012, claiming that they retaliated against him for the exercise of his First Amendment rights. UCLA tried to dismiss the case, filed 2 motions to dismiss the case. They failed in their effort to dismiss the case. And so then we went into lengthy and pretty grueling discovery. And For the non-lawyers out there, discovery is when you have the opportunity to ask questions of the other side. They're required to answer under oath. They have the opportunity to ask us questions, both in writing and in person. And so that process lasted a considerable amount of time, and it was very revealing. One of the things that we discovered was that these scientists who had terminated Dr. Enstrom claimed they had done it because he just wasn't doing his job well. When we interrogated them under oath, we found out that, in fact, they actually hadn't read Dr. Enstrom's research at all. And in fact, when they were talking about how they supported the scientific consensus, isn't that a term that sounds familiar when thinking of environmental issues? They hadn't read Dr. Enstrom's contrary research.
Wow.
So here was somebody in their department who had engaged in peer-reviewed research. This just wasn't some op-ed he'd written for a local paper. Peer-reviewed research that contradicted their approved narrative, and they didn't even take the time to look at it. One of the department chair said this in response to a question about one item of Dr. Enstrom's research. He says, and this is the most they confess to reading what he'd done. He says, well, believe me, I looked at the front pages. I just looked at the front pages.
Wow.
Did you read the full article? I did not. So can you imagine? I mean, this is middle school academics 101, that you read the entire thing before you're going to offer an opinion about it. I mean, imagine if you turned in a paper to your English teacher. It says, I read the first few pages of Tale of Two Cities. I feel pretty well qualified to opine about it now. It's just absurd. So we discovered that they hadn't even looked at his research when they terminated him. And then they were still clinging to their opinion despite not exposing themselves to peer-reviewed alternative points of view. So at the end of the day, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say we're talking with David French, and he's really detailing the ACLJ case that as they helped Dr. James Enstrom against an unlawful termination, to actually put it lightly, against UCLA. But more importantly here, the corruption behind the science review panels, the corruption behind the political regulations that are put forth by some of these groups, peer review, politicking and bias. The story just has so many more layers that goes way beyond just Dr. Enstrom's case, and to me reflects such a problem in science. And David, I come from a scientific background, and I cannot imagine. Let me say it this way. I remember having to stay late many of nights of reading another journal article, another paper that's going around, things like this, to stay up to date because my job was at stake. If I didn't know what was going on, it wouldn't keep me. I would have been cut loose. And yet you have the department chair who confesses that the only thing he looked at was the front page, and that is the most they had looked at during the peer review process. I got that pretty well summarized?
Well, no, that was the most they looked at of his peer-reviewed research.
Wow.
In other words, there was peer-reviewed research that he put out, and then they just didn't bother to read it.
Wow.
I mean, here's another one. This is from the dean of the School of Public Health. The dean of the school. Do you have general knowledge with regard to Dr. Enstrom's research? Answer, very general. Do you understand what his research is based upon? I don't know what his opinion is based upon.
Wow.
In other words, all she knew was his conclusions. She had no idea because she had not read what he could base his conclusions on. And yet her view on the science was unshakable. So that's what we're exposing here. We're exposing this level of scientific corruption because it is corruption. The scientific process, the scientific method requires one to be able to read and understand different points of view regarding contentious issues in science, to examine arguments, to examine evidence, to look at peer-reviewed research. Because as you know from your scientific background, peer-reviewed research, that's the gold standard. If something has made it through peer review, that means it's not simply just one man's opinion. It's passed a rigorous process. It says this is a scientific, these are scientific conclusions worth putting into the scientific public for consideration and review. And when they would not even look at the peer-reviewed research of their own colleague before terminating him, that was quite telling.
and I don't want to speak for David here, but I have many times told you guys, coming from this background, about the corruption in the scientific universe. We talk a lot about evolutionary theory, anti-creation movements. We talk a lot about global warming. We talk a lot about these things where I've told you that they love to throw around terms like peer review research, but this is proof positive of how corrupt that system really can be. I'm not saying it's all corrupt. I'm not saying that we shouldn't make certain decisions, but we need to be very scrutinizing of the process. And that's exactly what the ACLJ has done here, what David French has led a campaign to do, to rally around Dr. Enstrom and really protect his integrity and restore, the process at least a little bit, and hopefully stop some of the legislation and the regulation that California was going to put in place that was based on bogus science. This is crazy, and it's hard to believe how many people would have possibly have lost their jobs, right, David? I mean, as a result of this?
Oh, well, absolutely. But here's the really sad thing about it. Dr. Enstrom brought these issues to the attention of CARB. They went ahead with the regulations anyway.
I knew that. I just didn't want. I wanted to let you say that, not me, because it's how's that, folks? Here we have proof that it's completely bogus. It's completely wrong. He's outed the entire process. The people on the board have outlived their tenure. They're breaking the rules. They haven't read any of the research. They don't really know what's going on, and they pass it anyway. Wow, that's such a telling tale of 2015 right now. Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, fortunately for Dr. Enstrom, he achieved individual justice. UCLA had taken funds from his research account. He, in a settlement with the university, he received all the funds back that had been taken. He received a settlement of about $140,000. While he was fighting this, he retired, and he's now a retired researcher. Effectively, his termination was undone. He still has access to UCLA email. He's still so he has had that termination effectively reversed and been compensated for what he lost. So for him, he received individual justice, and we're very thankful for that. Now we have an obligation to go forward to demonstrate and to show what UCLA has done. And make the case to the public. You cannot just hear the word scientific consensus or mainstream opinion and think that has been an opinion or a consensus arrived at through a truly a process that is characterized by integrity and diligence. It's often a consensus or a mainstream opinion that's been arrived at through a combination of corruption, greed, and ideology.
David, I'm going to ask just an opinion question, taking you off the books here a little bit, because I make this assertion all the time from my own personal experience. I just wanted you to see if you think that I'm speaking out of line based on your experiences from this case and others, and that is what I experienced. Why I didn't stay in part of the research process was I would get paid by a grant to do research of X, and then when my results came in, so and so would get grant money Y to disprove what I did. Then grant party Z would come in, and they want for everyone to decide which of us is right. And then all three of us are now on tour to discuss our findings and debate about it. And all of this is all paid processes by usually taxpayer dollars, because most universities are using somehow taxpayer funds to fund all those grants.
Yes. Well, here's what's making this process worse than that. Let's say,
oh, that's fantastic, Dave. You just made me feel so much better. It's worse than what I even set up, folks.
Yeah. Let's say here's the way it works. The government, which is a source of an enormous percentage of funding in the sciences, and together with the universities that the government funds, has its own point of view.
Yeah.
The universities and the scientists who are sympathetic with the government point of view then begin to cast government funding as the only legitimate form of funding, and say that if you find funding from any other source, such as let's say you're in the pharmaceutical industry, if your funding for research is coming from a drug company, well, that's illegitimate. Or if you're in the environmental sciences and you get funding from a petroleum company, that's illegitimate. As if the government is unbiased. as if the government is unbiased, when everyone knows the government has a point of view. So government funding is not clean funding and corporate funding dirty funding. All of those dollars are coming from entities with points of view. The government has one, corporations have one. The answer to it is to not say that the findings financed by the government are worthy and findings financed by other entities are not worthy. The answer is transparency, and to say, here's who funded all research, and here are the conclusions. And then when you put the conclusions and the scientific basis to support them into the public square, that allows other people to come in and see if they can replicate your results, regardless of where the funding came from. I could get paid $50,000 by Exxon to say 2 + 2 = 4. Well, 2 + 2 is still 4.
Right.
Similarly, someone can be paid by the government for the same thing. But the idea that government funding is legit and everything else is suspicious is itself a product of left-wing ideology.
Yeah,
and we have to understand that.
Yeah, it's fantastic that you were able to get into this, really detail this with us, and I wish we had more time that we could spend with David French. This is an incredible story, and they cover incredible cases. Folks, we link to them all the time. We try to run as many of their press releases in case we miss something. The ACLJ does amazing work. We'll link to their site. We'll link to more of the story in case you missed the actual initial reporting of the settlement and some of the other facts. And you know what? Maybe you can continue to donate to what they're doing. They do amazing stuff. Many of you, we talk about Jay Sekulow all the time. We talk a lot about the Abedini situation, and we know that their group is there helping with a lot of those kinds of things. And definitely an extension, a silent extension, hopefully becoming more vocal now of this show and the website as well. And David French, I can't thank you enough for spending time with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.